Mafia boss yells at Waitress. She says 3 words that freeze the entire restaurant. The first sound of the night was the soft clink of crystal glasses, blending with slow jazz that floated through the golden air of Aurelia Rooftop. 72nd floor, Manhattan. From up here, the city lay stretched beneath the glass, like something tamed, its lights pulsing like veins of a living beast called New York. Inside, perfection reigned. White roses arranged with surgical precision, silverware aligned like soldiers, and not a single fingerprint left on the glass. Aurelia was not a restaurant. It was a statement, a shrine to power, a place where the rich came to remind the world who ruled it. Amid the luxury sat Dominic Hale. No one needed to ask who he was. His presence spoke louder than his name. The cold monarch of Wall Street, the man whose phone call could destroy empires. At 35, he had built Hale Global Holdings from nothing, an empire that spanned technology, banking, real estate, and media. Yet tonight, the man who owned half the city wasn't checking his phone or sipping his wine. He simply stared through the glass wall at the glittering skyline, where the city burned like 1,000 diamonds caught in the dark. No one dared meet his eyes for long. They said his gaze could stop a heartbeat. At the bar, Richard, the manager, watched him anxiously, hands clasped like in prayer. The waiters glided past silently, heads bowed. In Aurelia, even sound obeyed fear. Dominic's fingers tapped lightly against the table, an unconscious rhythm born from years of command. He despised waiting. In his world, time was the one thing no one had the right to waste, except him. Yet tonight, even time seemed to hesitate around him. Golden light bathed his face, catching in his silver-gray eyes. Beautiful, but empty. "Mr. Hale the usual, sir." Richard's voice trembled as he approached. Dominic didn't look up. As always, 3 words, soft and sharp, enough to send the man retreating into the shadows. When the kitchen door closed, the only sound left was the piano and the faint whisper of wind pressing against the glass. Dominic leaned back, tracing the rim of his untouched wineglass. He had once dreamed of nights like this, quiet, controlled, alone. He had earned everything: money, respect, fear, the illusion of peace. But from this height, even victory looked hollow. Through the window, the city shimmered beneath him, alive, desperate, oblivious. The silence surrounding him wasn't peace. It was a void, vast and cold. Power, he realized, had caged him in gold. Dominic Hale, the man who commanded markets and moved nations, was nothing more than a prisoner of his own perfection. The bars were invisible, the lock of his own making. Somewhere along the climb, he had forgotten what freedom smelled like, or how it felt to be looked at without fear. And as the music swelled, as golden light shimmered over the room, Dominic had no idea that only hours from now, a young woman with a red apron and eyes the color of hazelnuts would step into his world and shatter the golden cage with 3 simple words. If Dominic Hale's world was wrapped in golden silence, Elena Carter's was built from sleepless nights and half-funded dreams. The staff clock in the dressing room ticked toward 6. Elena tied her light brown hair into a neat ponytail, smoothed the red apron over her uniform, and stared at her reflection. The dark circles under her eyes hadn't faded. Her hands were rough from washing glasses, but her gaze was steady, bright with the quiet defiance of someone who refused to surrender. At 26, she was a final-year medical student at Columbia University. day classes, night shifts at Aurelia Rooftop, and barely 4 hours of sleep. Every tip she earned brought her closer to her dream of becoming a pediatric oncologist, not for prestige, but for a promise. Her mother's last words still echoed, "Do something that makes people less afraid." Cancer had taken her mother. Elena had chosen to fight back in her own way. Behind the golden curtains of Aurelia, the staff world was a different universe. No chandeliers, no polite laughter, only the sound of knives, plates, and orders shouted over sizzling pans. Yet even here, tension hung thick. Everyone knew who was dining in the corner tonight. "Carter," came Richard's voice, sharp enough to cut through the clatter. The tall, gray-haired manager always carried himself like a conductor, orchestrating chaos. "Listen carefully," he stepped closer, lowering his tone. "If Mr. Hale is here tonight, you stay away from that table. Don't look, don't talk, don't breathe in his direction." "Got it." Elena nodded, her expression calm. She'd heard the stories. Dominic Hale, the man who could bankrupt companies with a text message. But to her, he was just another customer. Rich, probably arrogant, used to being served. "Got it, Richard." "I mean it." His eyes softened, a flicker of pity beneath the authority. One server once asked if he wanted more wine. She was transferred the next day. Dominic Hale isn't someone you want to impress. Elena smiled faintly. "I'm not here to impress. I'm here to serve tables." The evening shift began. The revolving doors spun open, letting in a rush of cool air and the sound of live jazz. Aurelia gleamed like a treasure chest, crystal glasses shimmering under golden light. Politicians and celebrities smiling their polished smiles. Elena moved through it all, her red apron standing out like a heartbeat amid the black and gold. Every step was measured, placing glasses precisely, pouring wine without spilling, bowing just enough to be polite but not submissive. In a room built on performance, Elena's authenticity made her look out of place. Honest in a world allergic to honesty. "Table 15, more wine," a coworker called. She nodded, balanced a tray, and turned, just as she noticed Richard frozen by the reservation screen, his face pale. "Elena." His voice was quiet, strained. "Corner table, he's here?" She blinked. "You mean?" "Dominic Hale." He hesitated. "And you're assigned to his table tonight." For a heartbeat, the air seemed to thicken. Somewhere beyond the kitchen doors, the band shifted into a slower, darker melody, as if sensing what was coming. Elena glanced through the serving window toward the far end of the dining room. There he was, a lone figure in a black suit, sitting with perfect posture, his back to the glass wall, the city burning behind him. The light caught in his hair like silver fire, and though he didn't move, his presence seemed to bend the air around him. She drew in a slow breath, tightening her grip on the tray. "Come on, Elena," she whispered to herself. "He's just a customer, just another customer." But deep down, she already knew. Tonight wouldn't be like any other night. Elena took a deep breath, adjusted the tray in her hands, and stepped out of the kitchen. The revolving doors of Aurelia opened to a world of golden light and low jazz, the air perfumed with wealth and expectation. She moved past glittering tables, each step precise, controlled. But as she neared the far corner of the room, the atmosphere thickened. There he was, Dominic Hale, sitting like a monarch upon his silent throne. A plate of steak sat before him, steam curling upward. Elena set the wine tray down quietly, observing from a distance. Then it happened, a sound so sharp and restrained that it sliced through the entire restaurant. "What is this?" Dominic's voice was low, measured, but beneath it coiled something darker, anger waiting to ignite. Richard hurried over, his face draining of color. "Is something wrong, Mr. Hale?" Dominic's knife cut through the meat. He lifted a piece into the light, then slammed it down with a metallic ring. "I asked for medium rare. This is medium. Who cooked this?" The kitchen staff froze. Richard bowed his head. "Sir, I'll have them redo it immediately." "No." Dominic's interruption was quiet, deadly. "I don't pay for mistakes. I pay for perfection. Clearly, no one here understands that." The room fell silent. The piano stopped mid-note. A customer at a nearby table set down his glass as if afraid to breathe. Fear rippled through the air, invisible but palpable. From a few feet away, Elena watched. She'd seen difficult clients before, people who used money like a weapon, but this was different. The steak was flawless. She'd seen it leave the kitchen, pink and perfect. This wasn't about food. This was about control. She placed her tray aside and stepped forward. "Mr. Hale." Richard spun around, alarm flashing across his face. "Elena, don't!" But she was already there. Dominic looked up. The light caught in his silver-gray eyes, cold and unreadable. "And you are?" "Elena Carter, your server tonight." Her voice was calm, steady. "I just wanted to confirm the steak was cooked exactly as you requested, medium rare." A pause, the kind of silence that holds its breath. Richard tried to intervene, but Dominic's raised hand stopped him. He leaned back, studying her as if dissecting defiance itself. "So," he said softly, each word deliberate, "you're saying I'm wrong?" "No, sir," she answered, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I'm saying the dish is correct. I watched the chef cut it before it left the kitchen. If you prefer it cooked further, I'll have it remade, but it's not their mistake." Someone gasped. No one had ever spoken to Dominic Hale like that. He stood. He was tall, towering, and his shadow fell across her like a wall. "Do you know who you're talking to?" "Yes." Her reply was quiet but firm. "A customer." The air fractured. The weight of those two words hung between them like a blade. Dominic stared at her. In his eyes, anger flickered, then something else, something that looked dangerously like surprise. Around them, the restaurant waited for the inevitable explosion. But Elena didn't move. Her spine was straight, her chin lifted. Dominic stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, rough and charged. "You should be careful how you speak." Elena's eyes caught the light, bright, unyielding. "And you should be careful how you treat people." The silence that followed was absolute. The pianist's hands hovered, frozen, every gaze fixed on them. Then she said it, softly, clearly, each word slicing the air apart. "You don't own me." 3 words. Small, defiant, and world-shattering. A glass shattered somewhere. Richard's mouth fell open. A woman gasped, but Dominic just stood there, staring at her as if she'd spoken in a forgotten language. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten, he simply looked, and in that look was the weight of a man who'd spent years commanding fear and had just been disarmed by truth. For the first time in a decade, Dominic Hale, the man who ruled through silence, found himself speechless before a woman who refused to bow. And in that charged, impossible moment, something inside him shifted, something fragile, dangerous, and entirely new. Even after she walked away, the air inside Aurelia didn't return to normal. Conversations remained suspended, laughter faded mid-breath, and the pianist's hands hovered above the keys. When Dominic Hale finally set his knife and fork down, the sound rang sharper than it should have. He said nothing, no reprimand, no order. He simply stared at the plate, at the piece of steak now cold and forgotten. Richard watched from a cautious distance, waiting for the inevitable explosion. It never came. Dominic spoke at last, voice low and hollow. "I'll pay the bill." Then he stood, adjusted his tie, and left without looking back. Outside, the wind from the Hudson carried a biting chill. His black limousine waited by the curb. Dominic climbed in, but gave no direction. The city lights streamed by in a blur, but his mind remained in that room, with the girl who had looked him in the eye and dismantled his entire world with 3 simple words. "You don't own me." They weren't loud, they weren't cruel, yet they hit like a bullet, aimed at the one place no one had ever dared to touch. Dominic had been challenged before, insulted, envied, but never seen. No one had ever spoken truth to him, stripped of fear or agenda. That night, he didn't return to his penthouse. Instead, he checked into the Meridian, one of his own hotels. In the vast silence of a suite meant for power, he sat by the window, unbuttoned his cuffs, removed his watch, yet still couldn't breathe freely. Below, the city hummed beneath the rain, beginning to fall against the glass. He couldn't understand why he cared, why a nameless waitress occupied his thoughts. Her eyes haunted him. They hadn't begged, hadn't cowered. They had simply seen. And that terrified him more than any rival ever could. Dominic had built a life on control. Every person around him had a price, every bond a purpose. Feelings were liabilities. Yet when Elena Carter said those 3 words, his armor cracked. He wasn't angry, at least not in the way he expected. What he felt was something closer to emptiness, as though she had drawn back a curtain and revealed the void he'd been hiding behind power. The next morning, he arrived at Hale Global Holdings earlier than usual. The 52nd floor gleamed under sunrise. Assistants greeted him, schedules awaited, voices droned through meetings, but none of it reached him. His mind replayed that moment again and again, the defiance, the calm, the fire in her tone. By noon, he summoned his secretary. "I need the full staff list from Aurelia Rooftop, every name." She didn't question. 2 hours later, Dominic held a thin folder in his hands. Elena Carter, 26, Columbia University, medical student, night shift, 5 p.m. to 12 a.m. He read the name twice. Elena, soft on the tongue, resilient in sound, just like her. He set the folder down, leaned back, and exhaled a laugh he didn't understand. "Why can't I stop thinking about you?" he murmured. That evening, Dominic returned to Aurelia. Richard nearly dropped the reservation book when he saw him. "Mr. Hale, would you like your usual table?" "The same one," Dominic replied, scanning the room. He didn't need to say more. The order was clear, the same waitress. And when Elena arrived for her shift, she froze at the sound of her name. "Carter," Richard called, voice taut. "Corner table. Mr. Hale requested you personally." Her heart jolted. "Who did you say?" "Dominic Hale." For a second, she couldn't breathe. Part of her wanted to refuse, to walk out, but pride wouldn't let her. Fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. She took the tray, straightened her apron, and walked. Each step echoed louder than the jazz. Dominic sat exactly as before, his posture perfect, the city blazing behind him. When she approached, he lifted his gaze. The power in his eyes was still there, but something else now lived beside it. Curiosity. Neither spoke at first. The air between them felt suspended, as if sound itself held its breath. And in that silence, Dominic realized the truth. This woman, this ordinary waitress, had carved her way into his mind so quietly that no amount of control could undo it, and perhaps that frightened him more than anything he had ever faced. The rain had softened into a mist that washed the city clean. After her shift, Elena stood in the alley behind the restaurant, untying her red apron. Her hair was damp. Her reflection wavered in the puddle under the streetlight. She thought the night was over until her phone buzzed from Dominic Hale. "I owe you a thank you, coffee?" She stared at the screen, torn between reason and curiosity. Common sense said ignore it. Curiosity whispered back. She typed, "Only if it's somewhere public." 10 minutes later, a black car pulled up. Dominic stepped out, sleeves rolled, hair slightly wet from the rain. Without his suit jacket, he looked less like the man who commanded fear, and more like a man simply trying to breathe. "I know a place that stays open late," he said. She nodded. They found a small cafe off Fifth Avenue, half empty at that hour. The soft yellow lights fell across 2 steaming mugs. Outside, rain tapped gently on the roof. Inside, an old guitar hummed through the speakers. Dominic glanced around, almost awkwardly, as if he didn't belong in places untouched by wealth. Elena smiled. "Hard to picture the great Mr. Hale drinking coffee here." He looked at her, a hint of amusement curving his lips. "Call me Dominic. And honestly, I can't remember the last time I sat somewhere like this." It was a simple statement, but there was loneliness in his tone, a kind that made Elena pause. This was a man surrounded by everything, yet starved for something real. "Don't you have friends?" she asked, half joking. He laughed softly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Friends? In my world, people come for profit and leave for better offers. I have partners, shareholders, loyal employees. But friends?" He looked past the fogged glass toward the city lights. No. Silence settled briefly. She saw the fatigue in his posture, the weight of someone who'd fought too many battles for too little reason. "What about you?" he asked quietly. "Why do you work nights and study all day?" "Because I want to save people," she said simply. "My mother died of cancer when I was 16. I promised I'd help kids like her." He was quiet for a long moment, then softly, "That's a hard path." "And yours is a lonely one," she countered with a faint smile. "I guess we're both crazy in our own ways." Dominic laughed, genuinely this time. The sound surprised them both. He leaned forward, eyes gentler now. "You know, it's been a long time since I've had a conversation that didn't feel like a negotiation." "And maybe that's what you needed," she said. "Something honest, even for a few minutes." He watched her, the woman who had stood unflinching before him, now sipping coffee with quiet grace. For the first time in years, he wasn't calculating or commanding. He was just listening. "I can't remember the last time someone spoke to me without wanting something," he murmured. "Without fear, without pretending. You did it with 3 words." Elena tilted her head, smiling. "You still remember?" "Hard to forget," he said softly, eyes meeting hers. "They woke me up?" Their gazes held for a moment longer than comfort allowed. Outside, the rain began to fade, drops falling slower, gentler. Dominic leaned back, his voice low. "You know, it's been years since I said anything real." Elena's smile deepened. "And tonight you did. No titles, no walls, just Dominic." He looked at her, and for the first time saw himself reflected back. Not the man the world feared, but the man he used to be. When they parted, Dominic rose first. "Let me drive you home." She shook her head. "I'll walk. We both need air after a long night." He hesitated, then nodded, the corners of his lips curving faintly. "I don't know if I believe in fate," he said, "but I know I won't forget tonight." Elena watched as he stepped into the rain, his figure fading into the city lights. Something in her chest tightened, not fear, but something gentler, unnamed. It felt like the beginning of a shift, the quiet kind that changes everything, all because of a cup of coffee at midnight. Elena thought the coffee that night would be the end, a brief moment soon forgotten. But Dominic Hale was not a man who left things unfinished. A few days later, she saw him again. First, a glance across the restaurant, then another reservation timed perfectly with her shift, and later, short messages that carried neither flirtation nor command. "Hope your shift wasn't too hard. Tell me more about that dream of yours." The words were simple, almost cautious, as if he was searching for a reason to stay connected. And though she told herself to keep her distance, she replied, sometimes with a thank you, sometimes with a sentence, too long to be casual. Then came the nights that didn't feel so heavy anymore. Sometimes it was coffee after work, sometimes just quiet walks under streetlights. Dominic was different in those moments. The sharpness in him softened. He spoke of his early failures, of how success had taken everything but peace. Every word carried the weight of someone who'd forgotten how to rest. Elena listened, smiling faintly, sometimes saying nothing at all. She realized there was sadness behind the perfection, a void too vast for any empire to fill. One night by the Hudson River, he told her about growing up without a family, how he learned early that strength was the only shield. "I thought if I became powerful enough, nothing could hurt me," he said quietly. "Turns out I was wrong." She didn't answer, just stood beside him, watching the lights ripple across the water, and for once, he looked like a man trying to breathe. She didn't know when she began to wait for those meetings, not for his wealth or mystery, but for the rare calm his presence brought. Yet that calm scared her too, because she knew she was stepping into dangerous ground, the kind where reason loses to something unnamed. "He could burn this city down if he wanted," Daniel said one night in the staff kitchen, his tone sharp with warning. The steam from his cup of coffee curled between them. "Elena, that man isn't someone you get close to. Dominic Hale means power and destruction. There's a reason everyone here bows when he walks in." "I don't see that in him," she replied softly. "That's exactly the problem," Daniel snapped. "You only see what he lets you see. You have no idea what people like him can do." She stayed quiet. He wasn't wrong. She'd heard the stories, the ruthless takeovers, the companies he'd crushed without hesitation. But people weren't made of one side alone, and she had seen something else in him. The gentleness when he spoke of his past, the quiet laughter when she talked about children at the hospital, the way he listened as if every word she said mattered more than anything he owned. In the following nights, Dominic kept returning to Aurelia. Sometimes he didn't order food, just sat at the bar, waiting. When her shift ended, they walked together through empty streets. He'd talk about cheap Brooklyn coffee, about the used bookstore in West Village, about skipping class to read The Little Prince in a public library. Elena laughed. She couldn't picture the feared king of Wall Street sneaking books like a shy boy. But she also couldn't deny how human he looked in those stories. One night, as she turned to leave, Dominic said quietly, "I know I shouldn't be near you." She stopped. He continued, voice low, "I've hurt too many people thinking I didn't need anyone. But when I'm with you, everything feels different. You make me forget the person I've become." She looked at him for a long time. "Maybe that's exactly why I should stay away." He smiled faintly. "Maybe you're right." But both of them knew neither would stop. She walked away, the night air catching her coat. He stood there, watching her go, his eyes lit by something he couldn't name. They were two flames caught in the same wind, knowing it might destroy them, yet unable to fade. And for the first time, Elena realized her fear wasn't of Dominic Hale anymore. It was of herself, because she knew she was starting to believe what she shouldn't, that even the devil might have a heart. The autumn days passed in quiet rhythm. Dominic still came to Aurelia, sometimes just to sit at the bar and watch Elena work, sometimes leaving short, polite messages that said little but meant more than they should. Their silence had become its own language, a fragile thread tying two worlds that never should have met. Elena grew used to his presence, like one grows used to breathing something dangerous yet intoxicating. Then his world came crashing in. That evening, Aurelia was packed for a charity gala, hosted by New York's financial elite. Suits, champagne, camera flashes, an orchestra of wealth and power. Dominic sat at the center table, framed by light and influence, every inch the untouchable monarch he was rumored to be. Elena tried to stay away, serving on the far side of the room, but as she passed, she heard laughter, low, cutting, designed to wound. A man's voice carried across the table. "I heard Hale's been dining with his employees lately. That your new leadership strategy or just a personal hobby, Dominic?" Laughter rippled. Dominic looked up, expression unreadable. The speaker was Leon Varga, CEO of Varga Industries, his fiercest rival, a man as dangerous as Dominic, but louder about it. Leon raised his glass, smirking. "Just kidding. Everyone knows you don't mix business with pleasure. Or maybe this time's an exception." The table fell silent. Dominic smiled faintly, but his eyes turned to steel. "Be careful with your jokes, Leon. Some of them cost more than you can afford." Leon's grin widened. "I can always pay the price, especially when it's your game we're playing." The laughter died. No one dared breathe until the conversation changed. When the gala ended, Dominic slipped away to the rooftop terrace. The city glowed below, golden and infinite. Elena was clearing tables nearby. She hesitated, then walked toward him. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He didn't turn. "In my world, okay is an expensive illusion." She stepped closer. "Who was that man?" "Leon Varga," Dominic said. "Rival, or more accurately, a vulture waiting for me to fall. He knows how to weaponize an audience. One sentence from him can move the market. But what bothers me isn't what he said. It's what he knows." Elena's breath caught. "He knows about me?" Dominic didn't answer, and that silence was answer enough. "Does that scare you?" she asked quietly. He looked at her then, the edge of his lips curving faintly. "He could destroy my company, but he can't make me forget the way you looked at me that night." The honesty in his tone made her chest tighten. The wind carried the scent of wine and rain. Dominic set his glass on the railing and faced her fully. "I'm not worth your concern, but I know I'm pulling you into a world where everything has a price. And you, she said gently, are someone who's never learned how to measure things by worth. He let out a soft laugh. You really have no idea who you're talking to. No, she replied, her gaze unwavering. But I know you're more than what they say. For a long moment, he said nothing. The city lights flickered in his eyes, and for the first time, his composure cracked. Beneath the armor stood a man who'd spent his life alone in a room full of people. A man who had forgotten how to believe in kindness until her. From across the terrace, Leon passed by, tossing a parting line over his shoulder. See you soon, Dominic. We'll talk again, more privately next time. Elena didn't catch the undertone, but Dominic did. He watched Leon disappear into the elevator, then turned back to her, voice low. You should leave before I ruin your life, he said. She smiled faintly. It might already be too late. Under the city's dim light, they stood facing each other. Two souls caught between power and mercy, a danger and tenderness. The night around them hummed with the quiet promise of something both beautiful and doomed. And neither of them could look away. The first winter winds swept through Manhattan, turning the glass towers into frozen monoliths of power. Dominic stood by the window of his 60th floor office, the city's pulse flickering below. In his hand, his phone glowed with a name he had both longed for and feared, Elena Carter. He typed and erased again and again, before finally sending 4 words. We should stop this. No explanation, no goodbye, just a clean, cruel cut. Elena read the message in the quiet of the library, surrounded by medical books and soft amber light. She stared at it for a long time, as if her will alone could make the words disappear. But they stayed, cold, final, merciless. She called him. No answer. For 3 days, Dominic vanished. He stopped coming to Aurelia. No texts, no traces. Elena knew it wasn't indifference, it was fear, but knowing didn't make it hurt less. She went to Hale Global, only to be stopped by security. I'm sorry, miss, the receptionist said gently. Mr. Hale isn't taking personal visitors. She smiled bitterly and walked away, something inside her quietly breaking. That night, Dominic sat in his penthouse, staring into a glass of wine. He told himself he was doing the right thing, protecting her from the storm he knew was coming. But deep down, he knew the truth. It wasn't sacrifice, it was cowardice. Leon Varga struck first. The war began with whispers. Media headlines accused Hale Global of shady dealings. Anonymous sources, false audits, fabricated evidence. Within 48 hours, the company's stock plummeted 27%. Board members panicked. Investors threatened withdrawal. And at a press conference bathed in flashbulbs, Leon smiled and said, "The market always rewards the truth, and the truth always finds a way." Dominic understood the message. It was war. He called an emergency meeting. The conference room glowed under cold white light, tension thick as smoke. "What does he want?" someone demanded. Dominic answered simply, "Me." The lawyers pushed for the old ways, counterleaks, bribes, intimidation. But Dominic shook his head. "No," he said firmly, "not this time." The room went silent. "We'll fight him legally. I want proof he manipulated the market. We'll win with transparency." One executive scoffed. "Sir, Hale Global wasn't built on transparency." Dominic's gaze was steady. "Then it's time it was rebuilt." When the meeting ended, he stepped out to the balcony. The city stretched beneath him, glittering and distant. He turned his phone on. 12 missed calls from Elena. He didn't call back, but she found him anyway. That night, as he walked to his car in the underground garage, her voice cut through the echo of his footsteps. "How long do you plan to hide from me, Dominic?" He stopped. The shadows caught his outline. "You shouldn't be here." "And you don't get to decide that," she shot back, stepping closer. "You think vanishing protects me? I'm not some fragile thing you need to keep behind glass. I choose to stay, whether you like it or not." He turned to her, conflict etched in his face. "You don't understand. Leon will use anything, anyone to destroy me, and the only thing that can make me weak is you. Then let me be strong with you." Silence filled the space between them, heavy and trembling. Then Dominic exhaled, quiet, defeated. "You have no idea what you're stepping into." "Then tell me," she whispered. Their eyes met, no longer the gaze of a waitress and her impossible customer, but of two people standing at the edge of love and ruin. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, like an omen. Dominic knew he couldn't keep both worlds, power and conscience, love and survival. But for the first time, he was choosing the harder path, the one that felt right. As the elevator doors closed, Elena's voice drifted up, soft but unwavering. "I'm not going anywhere, not even if you try to make me." And in that dim, sterile light, Dominic Hale understood that the coming war wasn't only against Leon Varga, it was against the man he used to be. The following days passed under the weight of silence. New York buzzed with tension. On every screen, in every headline, one name echoed like a storm: Hale Global. Leadership crisis. The fall of a Wall Street empire. Leon Varga challenges Hale. Everywhere Elena turned, there he was, but not where she needed him to be. There were news clips, but no messages, no calls, no sign of him. She tried to keep busy, work, study, pretend. But silence is a cruel companion. Daniel warned her more than once. "Forget him, Elena. That world isn't yours." She nodded, said nothing, and every night she found herself staring at the Hale Tower lights, wondering if he was somewhere behind them, thinking of her too. Then one evening, as she locked the cafe they'd once shared, her phone lit up. A message. "Meet me tonight," and below it, "Same place." Her breath caught. Outside, rain began to fall, soft, hesitant. She didn't think, she simply went. The cafe was unchanged. The same dim light, the same scent of roasted coffee. When she walked in, Dominic was already there. No suit, no tie, just a white shirt and dark coat. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Not cold anymore, not haunted, just calm. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "I thought I'd lose everything. Maybe I still will. But sometimes losing is the only way to see what really matters." She sat across from him, her hand brushing the warm cup he'd ordered for her. "Leon?" "He's still attacking," Dominic said, voice steady. "But I chose another way. I turned over everything to the financial authorities, even the parts that could hurt me." She blinked. "You did that?" He nodded. "I'm tired, Elena. Tired of hiding behind power. If I have to lose everything to keep what's left of my soul, then so be it." She stared at him. For the first time, she saw the man behind the empire. A man who had finally stopped running. "You've changed," she whispered. "Or maybe," he said softly, "I've just come back to who I was supposed to be." The rain deepened outside, streaking down the window in gold reflections. Between them stretched a silence that wasn't awkward. It was full, complete. "I'm scared for you," she said finally. That world doesn't forgive people who choose what's right. I know, Dominic replied, but if doing the right thing means losing power, then maybe power was never worth it. She smiled faintly. You sound like me. He met her gaze, warmth flickering in his eyes. Maybe you taught me. They didn't need more words. The air between them shifted, something unspoken, something pure. Dominic reached across the table and took her hand. His was cold, but steady. Thank you, he murmured, for staying. Elena didn't answer. She just leaned closer. Their lips met, not in urgency, but in quiet recognition. It was a kiss not born of passion, but of redemption, where strength met kindness and both surrendered. Outside, the rain fell harder, yet the world seemed to hold its breath. When they finally parted, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. For the first time in years, he whispered, I feel peace. Elena smiled, her breath brushing his lips. Peace isn't the end, it's the beginning, he nodded. Then let this be ours. And in that small cafe under the rain, they sat together, two souls who had crossed every line to find each other, finally choosing truth over fear and love over power. After that kiss, the world around them seemed to slow. No rain, no cars, just the rhythm of two breaths learning to match. When they left the cafe that night, Dominic's hand held hers gently, as if letting go might undo everything they'd just found. She met his gaze, steady, quiet, unspoken. Neither needed promises. They both knew peace was fragile. In the days that followed, Dominic disappeared again, but not to hide. This time, he was rebuilding. Hale Global began to shift, quietly but profoundly. The office felt different, lighter. Dominic no longer barked orders. He listened. He sold off the shadowy holdings, severed ties with questionable partners, and poured the funds into renewable energy, children's hospitals, and educational foundations. When the board protested, he simply said, "Profit can be rebuilt, integrity can't." And the room fell silent. The media, once merciless, started changing their tone from fallen titan to Wall Street's reformer. But Dominic didn't care for the headlines. For the first time in years, he could breathe. Meanwhile, Elena buried herself in her final thesis, immunotherapy in pediatric oncology. She spent nights in the lab, mornings in the library, chasing a dream that demanded all of her. Dominic knew even without her saying. Quietly, he made sure her lab received new equipment, that her grant was approved, that her project never hit a wall. Elena never confronted him about it. She didn't need to. She understood. It was love, expressed through action, not control. One afternoon, under the first blush of spring, Dominic waited for her at Riverside Park, the same bench where they'd once walked after that fateful night. The sky was blue, the air clear, and in his hand was a small silver box. When she arrived, he rose, his expression calm, almost shy. "I have something for you," he said softly. She arched an eyebrow. "Please don't tell me it's Hale Global stock." He laughed, a warm, unguarded sound. "No, something smaller, but maybe more important." He opened the box. Inside lay a delicate gold necklace, its pendant engraved with the Hale insignia, two wings intertwined. Elena hesitated. "You didn't have to—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "But listen, this symbol used to remind me that nothing and no one could hurt what was mine. It stood for power and possession. But I don't want that anymore. Now it means no one is allowed to hurt you." She looked at him, sunlight threading through her hair. "Then let it mean respect, not ownership. Dominic paused, then smiled. The kind of smile that didn't need perfection to be beautiful. Then it will be ours. She took the necklace, her fingers brushing his. In that simple exchange, she saw the truth. The man who had once terrified Wall Street was now learning how to believe again. They sat together, watching the Hudson shimmer under the fading light. Dominic spoke about his new project, a children's hospital funded by the Hale Foundation's Aurora program. "It'll be a place where hope doesn't run out," he said. "Like you once hoped." Elena smiled, her heart full. "You don't need redemption, Dominic. You just need to live what you've learned." "Maybe," he said quietly. "For the first time, I finally know what I believe in, and it's not profit." A soft wind passed through, carrying the scent of water and blossoms. Elena rested her head on his shoulder. Dominic watched the sunset bleed across the sky, gold melting into red. He knew storms still waited, lawsuits, unfinished wars, enemies that wouldn't forget. But for now, none of it mattered, because she was beside him. "I used to think redemption meant paying a price," he murmured. "But maybe it just means starting over, with a different heart." Elena squeezed his hand. "And you already have." The last light of the day caught the gold pendant on her hand, glinting softly. It shone not as a symbol of power, but as a quiet vow that from now on his strength would protect, not possess. After those rare days of peace, when the wind over the Hudson carried the gentle breath of spring, Dominic Hale believed that the storm in his life had finally passed. He had rebuilt his empire, rediscovered himself, and had Elena by his side, a quiet reminder that a man could still be forgiven. But peace, for those who once lived in the eye of chaos, was never permanent. It was only the pause between two tempests, and soon the storm came back, swift, brutal, and without warning. That morning, sunlight spilled through the glass windows of his high-rise office, glinting off the polished wood desk. Dominic was reviewing the expansion plan for the Hale Foundation when the door burst open. Lucas, his trusted assistant, rushed in, pale and shaken. "Mr. Hale, you need to see this." He placed a tablet on the desk. The screen was flooded with headlines screaming across major outlets: "Reborn hero or master manipulator? Elena Carter, med student who climbed high on love and privilege. Hale Global, a clean face, an old soul." The entire financial world ignited overnight. The media spun doctored images, weaving a narrative that Dominic's redemption was nothing but disguise. And behind it all was Leon Varga, the old rival, the man Dominic had defeated in court. Now striking again, this time not at his wealth, but at his honor, his credibility, and the fragile love he had built with Elena. Dominic read the false reports with a calm face, but inside him anger burned slow and steady, like fire in forged steel. It wasn't his own humiliation that hurt. He'd endured that all his life. But the fact that Elena was being dragged into this filth. That evening, she came to his office, still in her white hospital coat, hair tied back, exhaustion shadowing her eyes but not dimming their resolve. "I'm fine," she said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't care what they write. I just don't want you to do something reckless." Dominic looked at her for a long time. "I won't let them touch you, I swear it." Elena stepped closer, her hand resting on his desk, gaze unwavering. "You don't need to swear. Just keep your promise to yourself. Don't use fear to answer fear." That single sentence cut through the ice around his heart like a blade. He understood, if he fought back with power, everything he had rebuilt would crumble. Not just his reputation, but the man he was trying to become. 3 days later, Dominic filed a federal lawsuit against Leon Varga, accusing him of defamation, media manipulation, and corporate sabotage. Wall Street mocked him. "He's lost his mind," they said. "You can't win with rules in a world built on rule-breaking." But Dominic pressed forward, one deliberate step at a time, fueled by the quiet faith Elena had rekindled in him. Leon appeared on national television, wearing that same smug smile, his voice smooth as oil. "Dominic Hale thinks he can whitewash his past with a few charitable projects," he sneered. "But people like him don't change, they just learn to hide it better." Elena watched the broadcast alone in her small apartment, her fists clenched with anger and fear. That night, when she found Dominic in the darkened boardroom, the city lights rippling across his face, he looked both exhausted and unbreakable. "You're not going to retaliate, are you?" she asked. "No," he said quietly, his voice tired but steady. "I just want to win once, without making anyone afraid." "You will," she replied with quiet certainty, "because this time you're fighting for truth." The courtroom became their battlefield, a stage of tension and silence. Reporters filled every seat. Flashes exploded like lightning. Dominic walked in each morning in a dark suit, holding nothing but his files. No bodyguards, no arrogance, just resolve. Elena was always there, sitting in the last row, her presence steadying him more than any lawyer's argument ever could. Leon fought dirty, as expected. False witnesses, forged documents, edited videos. But Dominic didn't erupt. He let the truth speak, piece by piece, until every fabrication began to collapse under its own weight. Day after day, the lies unraveled. Those who'd taken Leon's money came forward, confessing one by one. When the judge finally read the verdict, no one breathed. Defendant Leon Varga, guilty of defamation, media manipulation, and corporate sabotage, sentenced to 3 years in prison and full restitution of damages. Dominic closed his eyes, releasing a breath that felt like 10 years leaving his body. Elena rose from her seat and walked toward him, her hand finding his. He didn't speak. He simply held on, a wordless thank you that said everything. 3 days later, at the press conference, the hall was blinding with camera flashes. Dominic stepped onto the stage, Elena beside him in a pale blue dress, her smile soft yet radiant. "Thank you," Dominic began, his deep voice steady in the silence. "Thank you for believing in truth. We didn't win because we had power. We won because we refused to let power define what's right." For a moment, the room was still. Then the applause rose, long and thunderous. Elena turned toward him, the reflection of the lights shimmering in her eyes like summer water. Without a word, the world understood. This wasn't just the victory of a man. It was the triumph of faith, of kindness held firm through the storm. As they stepped down from the stage, Dominic leaned close and whispered, "The storm, it's finally over." Elena smiled, her fingers tightening around his. "No, Dominic, it hasn't ended. It's only changed direction. Now it's called hope." And in that blinding sea of light, the two of them walked forward together, not as a tycoon and a waitress, but as two souls who had learned how to stand in the storm without losing themselves. It was an early summer morning, the sky over New York clear as glass, reflecting sunlight like a mirror of gold. the courtyard of Columbia University's medical campus overflowed with people. Hundreds of graduates stood in black gowns, laughter rippling under a canopy of white balloons. Elena stood among them, clutching the diploma that bore her name, Elena Carter, Doctor of Medicine. She had made it. After all the sleepless nights, the failures, the fear and tears, she had finally reached the dream she once thought impossible. Applause thundered as the dean stepped up to speak. Elena smiled, sunlight glinting off her face, her eyes shimmering like pieces of the sky. In the sea of people, she turned instinctively and froze. Dominic Hale was standing at the edge of the stage. He wore a simple gray suit, nothing extravagant, nothing loud. Yet he stood out, not because of power, but because of the quiet tenderness in his gaze. His eyes no longer carried the cold weight of authority, but the warmth of a man watching the person he loved touch her destiny. When the ceremony ended, students spilled out into the courtyard, laughter and shouts filling the air. Elena turned, looking for him. When a ripple spread through the crowd, people began to part, one after another, creating a path through the sea of color and sound. And there he was, Dominic, walking slowly toward her. He stopped in front of her, the sunlight caught in his silver-gray eyes. In his hand was a small velvet box. Elena stared, her heart hammering wildly. "Dominic," she whispered, almost breathless, "what are you doing?" He smiled, a soft, disarming smile that seemed to erase all the years of pain. "You once told me," he began, voice low but clear, "that I don't own you, and you were right. I never will. I just hope you'll choose me." Silence fell across the courtyard. Then, slowly, Dominic knelt down on one knee, the crowd gasping in unison. He opened the box. Inside, a diamond ring caught the sunlight, scattering it like a small constellation. The courtyard erupted. Cheers, applause, laughter, the kind that shakes the air. Elena stood frozen, tears streaming down her cheeks, her lips trembling into a smile. Dominic looked up, voice steady but thick with emotion. "I have nothing to offer but honesty and gratitude. You believed in me when the whole world doubted. So today, among everyone who has seen you fight and rise, I just want to ask one thing. Elena Carter, will you spend the rest of your life with me?" Elena covered her mouth, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. The world around her blurred into color and sound. Only he remained, the man whose eyes had once been made of winter, now filled with sunlight. Tears spilled down, and she nodded, her voice trembling but clear. "Yes." The crowd roared. Dominic rose, his hands shaking as he slid the ring onto her finger. The diamond caught the light and shimmered, a symbol of everything they had endured. Every fall, every forgiveness, every step from darkness into grace. Elena laughed through her tears as Dominic pulled her into his arms. The noise of cameras, cheers, applause, all of it faded away. All she heard was his heartbeat against her ear, the rhythm of a man who had learned gentleness the hard way. "I promised I'd never own you," Dominic whispered, voice husky with emotion. "And I still won't, but you've made me believe that sometimes choosing together is its own kind of freedom." Elena smiled up at him, eyes wet, radiant. "And the most beautiful freedom," she murmured, "is the one born from love." They stood there in the center of the courtyard as white balloons drifted down like summer snow. The ring glimmered on her hand, their eyes reflecting the same golden light, their smiles a quiet vow to everything they had become. Outside the gates, the wind carried ribbons and flower petals into the air. Elena squeezed Dominic's hand, feeling his pulse merge with hers. In that moment, she understood. Every pain, every loss, every storm had led them here. To this instant, where two souls finally found each other, not through power or fear, but through faith and love in their purest form. The sunlight struck the ring, igniting it like a small star. And in the middle of the cheering crowd, Dominic Hale and Elena Carter smiled at each other. Not at the end of their story, but at the beginning of a new one, where love was no longer the reward, but the proof of redemption itself. After that graduation day, the city seemed to shine brighter. News of Dominic Hale's public proposal to Elena Carter spread across every headline, but for them, it was nothing more than a quiet morning where two lost souls had finally found each other again. In the days that followed, Dominic poured himself into the new Aurora Foundation projects, while Elena began her internship at the Children's Hospital. Every evening they met at their old cafe, planning a wedding that would be intimate, simple, and full of light. No extravagance, no spectacle, only truth, music, and the people who had witnessed their journey. When Dominic asked where she wanted the ceremony to be held, Elena didn't hesitate. She looked at him and smiled softly. At Aurelia Rooftop, that's where it all began. He fell silent for a moment, then nodded. And so, in the heart of glittering New York, a place once known for power and pride was transformed into a sanctuary for the simplest vow of all. That evening, the city was bathed in gold. The sunset spilled molten light between glass towers, reflecting across the transparent rooftop of Aurelia, the very place where fury had once reigned, now transformed into the stage for a lifelong promise. The terrace bloomed with white flowers, soft ribbons swaying in the breeze. The corner table that had once been a throne of fear was gone. In its place stood an arch of white roses, curving like a doorway to a new world. Guests arrived from every walk of life, business leaders, doctors, Elena's classmates, and people who had once worked under Dominic's command. They mingled freely, no longer divided by class or title. Beneath the golden light of dusk, everyone smiled, as though witnessing not just a wedding, but the redemption of two souls. Elena stepped through the glass doors in a simple white gown, lace brushing softly with each gust of wind. Her brown hair fell in loose waves, dotted with tiny white blooms. The evening sun caught her face, and for a moment, everything stopped. Dominic waited at the end of the floral path, no longer the cold CEO of Wall Street, but a man trembling slightly with happiness. When their eyes met, Aurelia Rooftop seemed to hold its breath. Music rose, the violin merging with the wind. Elena walked forward through a carpet of white petals. When she reached him, Dominic took her hand, his fingers trembling. "You came," he whispered, voice low and thick. "And this time," she smiled, "you don't get to run." They both laughed softly, like sunlight brushing through the summer air. When the officiant spoke, the world quieted. Dominic turned toward her, eyes lit by the dying light of day, and began to speak, slowly, each word etched in air. "I once believed power was the only way to survive, that to be respected, you had to be feared. But you showed me something else, that true strength lies in restraint, in compassion, in faith. Today, in front of everyone here, I choose restraint, I choose what's right, and I choose you, every day, for the rest of my life." The room went still. Only the wind and the soft violin replied. Elena looked up at him, eyes glistening, and answered, "I can't promise that every day will be perfect, but I promise to walk beside you through calm and storm alike. I choose you, not because you're perfect, but because you dared to change. I choose you with my freedom." No one moved. Then quietly, Dominic wiped a tear from the corner of his eye. The officiant smiled, voice trembling slightly. "With all love and faith, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Applause erupted, rolling across the glass rooftop like ocean waves. Dominic leaned down and kissed her, their kiss not just of two people, but of two lives that had crossed darkness to find the light. White petals fell from above, and the air filled with the faint fragrance of flowers and new beginnings. Later, at the reception, Richard, the restaurant manager from long ago, approached with a glass of wine. "I still remember the night she served you," he said to Elena, chuckling. "Who would have guessed a fight over steak would end like this?" Dominic laughed, looking at Elena with a soft, knowing gaze. "That was the most expensive dinner of my life." Laughter rippled around the table. The band struck up a familiar jazz tune, old and sweet. Elena rested her head on Dominic's shoulder as he led her to the balcony. Below them, the city sparkled, a constellation made of steel and glass. "Did you ever think," Dominic asked quietly, "that it would end right where it began?" "It's not an ending," she smiled. "Just another beginning." He fell silent, squeezing her hand. "I still remember the day you said those 3 words." "So do I," she whispered. "You don't own me." Dominic smiled, voice rough with emotion. "Now I only hope you'll keep choosing me." "I already have," she breathed, "and I'll keep choosing you every day." Beneath the white arch, under the golden lights and tender music, they stood side by side, not as a Wall Street king and a waitress, but simply as Dominic and Elena, 2 people starting anew, holding only one possession worth keeping: love. The past closed its doors. The future opened wide, and on the rooftop of Aurelia, where once there had been anger, now there was only light, and the steady sound of 2 hearts learning to beat as one beneath the forgiving sky of a city reborn. 5 years had passed since that sunset on the Aurelia rooftop. The city was still loud, still radiant with lights, as if nothing had changed. Yet, in a small house in Brooklyn, something quiet and extraordinary was unfolding. Something gentle enough to soften the entire world. Each morning, Elena woke first. She brewed coffee, opened the windows, and let sunlight spill into the kitchen. The smell of roasted beans mingled with the sound of birds outside. Around her neck, she still wore the gold Hale pendant, not as a token of possession, but as a symbol of faith and freedom. On the table sat a framed photo of her and Dominic at their Aurelia wedding. Beside another picture, Dominic holding a little girl with soft brown hair and warm hazel eyes, her mother's eyes, Amelia Hale, 3 years old, their daughter, their pride, their living proof that hope could grow from chaos. Elena worked at St. Jude's, one of the largest pediatric oncology hospitals in this city. Every morning, she entered the ward with a gentle smile, greeting the children clutching stuffed toys, her voice steady but tender. Some days brought heartbreak, some days tears, but whenever exhaustion threatened, she touched the pendant at her neck and remembered his words. "I choose what's right, and I choose you every day." Those words lit a small, steady fire inside her, one that never went out. Dominic no longer ran Hale Global. He had turned over his shares to an independent board and kept only an honorary title. Instead, he led the Hale Foundation, a non-profit supporting children, education, and medical research. From a tiny office, it had grown into a network across more than 10 countries. Photos lined his walls, smiling children in India holding scholarship letters, a new hospital wing opening in Kenya, thank you notes written in clumsy crayon. It was a different kind of power now, the power of kindness. In the afternoons, Dominic left work early to pick up Amelia from daycare. She would run into his arms, her fingers smeared with paint. "Daddy, I drew Mommy today," she'd say, holding up a wildly colorful picture of a woman in a white coat and brown hair. He laughed, kissing her forehead. "It's perfect, little artist." Evenings glowed with the warmth of ordinary life. Elena cooked, Dominic set the table, and Amelia sang songs between bites of pasta. After dinner, he read bedtime stories until her eyes fluttered closed. Then Elena would lean her head on his shoulder, both of them wrapped in that rare, quiet peace. "Did you ever think," she asked softly, "that we'd end up this peaceful?" Dominic smiled, gaze distant. "No, but maybe this is the one thing I never planned, and the only thing I never want to lose." They sat in silence for a while, the clock ticking gently. Outside, the wind carried the smell of coming rain. Dominic reached for her hand, his eyes soft. "I spent most of my life trying to be the one who commanded. Now I just want to listen, to you, to her, to life." Elena smiled, turning to him. "Maybe that's what power really means," she said. "Not making people fear you, but making them believe." He nodded. "And you made me believe." A breeze drifted through the window. Beyond the glass, the city glimmered under the night sky. Inside that small room, Dominic and Elena sat together, not as CEO and doctor, but as two people who had learned how to love kindly, live gently, and trust deeply. From the next room came the soft sound of Amelia breathing in her sleep. Elena rose, tucked the blanket around her daughter, and turned to Dominic. "She'll grow up in a better world, won't she?" Dominic wrapped his arms around her, his voice low and warm. "If we keep choosing right every day, she will." They stood there for a moment, saying nothing more. Outside, the lights of the city glowed through the window, shining across an old photo on the wall. Two people smiling beneath a white arch on Aurelia's rooftop, under a sky full of sunlight. A simple life, a happy one. Proof that sometimes love doesn't just change a person, it can redefine the meaning of power itself.